Welcome back to Inflation Decoded and Explained. Today we have a very interesting question. When is inflation high? When is it excessive or dangerous? And when is it in a state that we shouldn't worry about, just normal inflation? Well, let's quickly look at the economic cycle that we all know either from high school or from college. The four phases: boom, decline, recession, and recovery. That system works pretty well. In a nutshell, it works as follows. Let's say we have a recession. What does the central bank and governments do? They try to push the economy into a more positive territory again. How do they do that? They lower interest rates. They make credit more available. That's particularly the central bank's job. And in addition, there's fiscal spending to create from the government a little bit more spending that creates money in the economy and demand, and therefore we hopefully get to a recovery. And if we have enough in momentum, we go even into a boom, and there we have to be careful because we don't want the economy to overheat. That's the point when we have to put the foot on the brake. How do we do that? We raise interest rates, we make credit less available for the banks. And just think about it. If there's less credit, think about all the products that are sold in an economy, particularly in modern economies like the US, on credit, with loans, with mortgages. So restricting interest rates and credit is a powerful way to slow the economy, and also fiscal spending. If we put this a little bit down and we don't create extra demand, we can very nicely steer from boom, decline, recession, recovery in a circular movement. And obviously during this time prices are not that strongly rising, so there's less inflation, and here we have more inflation, but nothing to worry about as long as this cycle works pretty well. Now, why do we get high inflation and excessive inflation or dangerous inflation if that system works pretty well? Well, sometimes we get ahead of ourselves. For example, in the 70s, central banks and government in the 70s tried to fine-tune this very robust system. And they said, why do we have a decline and recession? Maybe we can be a little bit more active, a little bit more supportive on the central bank side, on the interest rate and credit side, and on fiscal spending. And ideally, we just stay in this orange area, boom and recovery, right? Maybe a tiny bit of a decline, but what we want to be in that positive area of the economic cycle. That was pretty naive, and we paid the price for this in the 70s. There was very high inflation, 1973. It started until 1982, until we got back on track again. And that was the time when Paul Volcker, the president of the Federal Reserve, put interest rates very high and really put both feet on the brake. And we got back to a normal system again. Now we're making the same mistake again. So what we're doing right now, the issues today, in a nutshell, is we use recession tools, like these tools, even though we have a boom. We have GDP doing well, and but we have record low interest rates. We have record high debt creation. We have record high fiscal spending around the world and fiscal deficit. This is absurd when you think about it. We use the measures that we use during this period, recession and decline, even though we are in a recovery boom area. And that's when inflation gets out of control. It can get high or excessive. And let's look a little bit deeper into the differentiation between high and excessive. Inflation is normal when we are in a normal economic cycle. Nothing to worry about. We can work with that. Inflation is high when the inflation rate is above the central bank target. Every central bank has kind of an inflation target that they say, if we're above that, that's inflation being too high, and when we're below it, that's inflation being too low. So inflation can be high, but it's not dramatic as long as central banks react to it and bring it back at the target or below the target. Now, we're now in a period, or we're entering a period, where inflation could be excessive. That means it's dysfunctional. It's above target, but not only that. Salary increases happen, but they are below the inflation rate. So that means that people that get their salaries, they're happy about getting more income, but it's not enough to basically offset the inflation factor. The same on the savings rates. That will eat up your savings, your wealth. If inflation is way above the saving rate, that means every year, basically, there is an invisible tax taking money out of your saving account. That's dysfunctional. Why is this dysfunctional? Because very dangerous things happen next. First of all, there will be a loss of faith in paper money. And I do think that the cryptocurrencies these days are a sign of some of these losses of faith in paper money. People say, well, I like my currency, but let's be sure and put a little bit into real assets or cryptocurrencies. Not endorsing them in any way, but that's probably the thinking behind there. There's also typically, when inflation is excessive, a flight from financial assets like bonds and in some ways also stocks to real assets. Something where people have something in their hand where they say, this is real, and even if the paper money system collapses, I still have this house, this car, this motorcycle, this collectible, this precious metal, and so on. And also, there will be dysfunctional behaviors like hoarding. When people realize inflation goes up every year, they start to buy the things that they need anyway already now. There's no reason why you cannot hoard the coffee supply that you need for the next 2 years or other non-perishable foods. And that's what you see in high inflation or excessive inflation countries. There's hoarding. And that creates even more of a mess in this cycle because it self-propels inflation. You also see preemptive price increases. Companies say, well, I assume next year we're going to have the same dangerous inflation like this year, so I'm already ahead and raise the prices. And that's very bad. So that's the point where we have to be very careful when we go from high inflation into excessive inflation and when we lose control. Now, I hope this little tutorial helped you to build a little understanding about this. If you like it, we're going to talk a little bit more about the investment side in the next few videos. And hit subscribe so you get a notification when the next video comes out. And if you like it or if you have any comments, shoot me a message. I'm happy to hear your feedback. Good luck and try to be active, try to think through inflation. It's a very concrete risk that we all have to live with. Thank you.